to give a talk on the subject that he had gone to study. This was attacked by the party under inducement from Price as a sellout to the West Indies. You see, in other words, a number of party loyalists were put on Albert's tail to harass him with betrayal, with being a traitor. You see, and one interesting aftermath that this had was a few weeks later, Albert, one of these same people who had criticized Albert about going to talk about this thing with the Caribbean, came to Albert and said, well, you know, I was passing the library, that's the library on Northern Street, last night, and I went in there and there was somebody talking about the trade unionism. And I found it very, very interesting. He said, it's things like that that you should be talking about. He said, I would fool along with the West Indian people. Well, Albert said, well, that is exactly the thing that I was going to talk about, that George Price put you people up to attack me about. So that there was this unreasonable hatred for the things West Indian. Black people in Belize City were being frightened that other black people were coming into the country, and using this as reason why they should denounce their leaders for betrayal of the people in the country. You see. So that's the kind of atmosphere we had in those days.
It seems unusual that this kind of tactic would be used. I mean, to try to convince black Belizeans, who were, of course, in the majority at that time, that they should be afraid of other black people in the Caribbean. Yet you're saying this is the strategy that was used.
But that's how it happened. It's fantastic.
Well then, when you eventually broke away from the People's United Party, you broke away accusing members of the People's United Party of being in cahoots with Guatemala and not having the best interests of Belize and Belizeans at heart.
Yes.
Was this suddenly a maturity on your part in terms of the reality of politics, or was there some specific revelation that came to you, or what is it that brought about this?
As time went on, George Price became bolder and bolder in his pro-Guatemalan activities and pro-Guatemalan views.
For example, what?
Well, for instance, after the elections in 1954, the British government invited us to go to London to discuss the development of the country. Price refused to go, and of course used this for political propaganda against British, myself, and Jex, who went. In London, the Secretary of State, Lennox Boyd, told us, okay, you're newly elected. We are going to give you a certain amount of money. I think it was £2 million or something that they gave us. I would like you to go back home and make your own development plan. And the British government will help you to carry out your plan. In fact, the words he used at the time was, we want to show the region that these colonies can develop politically and economically while they're associated with Britain. This was a time when Guyana was in conflict with Britain under Chedid Jagan, and he was accused of being a communist and so on. You know. So I believe that he probably had that idea in mind, that Belize could develop economically while still be a member of the British Commonwealth, moving towards independence in its own time, according to the will of its people and so on. Now, when we came back and we mentioned all this to the people, George Price immediately began a campaign to undermine this development. So that by the time we left the POP, the whole program of working along with the British had been undermined and destroyed.
Were you given any promise at the time? Certainly in hindsight, we can see that the British is full of intrigue, full of mechanisms of deception to ensure that their own agenda is fulfilled and that they don't have our best interests at heart necessarily, because the initial problems you were talking about from the early history was because of the British mechanisms. Do you think that were there any promises that were made to you in those early days by the British to say that you need to, for example, get away from George Price and do your own thing?
This came about after the break came.
Then they approached you.
Well, they didn't exactly approach us, but there was a visit from the minister, I think he was at the colonial office at the time, John Perfumer, who later was brought down the British government when he played around with a young lady.
What kind of promises did they make?
Well, but they didn't make any promise. What they said, what he said when he came here, I think it was in 1958 he came, after we had left the POP and founded the party called the Honduras Independence Party. At that time, there also existed the National Party, led by Herbert Fuller. Now, Perfumer came here, and he had talks with the political leaders of the country. When Fuller and I met with him, he said, you know, we get knowledge that there's going to be an intensification of the Guatemalan claim to Belize. And he said, you know, it is my personal opinion that you two small opposition parties should combine to deal with that situation, you see. Partly as a result of that suggestion, but also as a result of what we perceived to be the realities. We had just been defeated, totally defeated in the 1957 elections. Then Price had gone on a delegation to England and had to be sent home by the Secretary of State for what the governor called selling out Belize lock, stock, and barrel to Guatemala. You see, he had talks in London with the Guatemalan ambassador there, sent specially to hold discussions with him and his delegation. And members of his own delegation revealed to the governor that these secret talks were going on.
So you would say that in your discussions with the British prior to your break from the People's United Party, that you in fact can't recollect them trying to create a break between the two?
No. As a matter of fact, the governor blamed or tried to blame the Richardson for the break. And I realized, he spoke to me about it, and I told him, you know, Richardson was a very tactless person, but he was genuine, he was honest, he was truthful. And while Price was totally deceptive and capable of misleading anybody, and I tried to warn the governor not to believe, to be too ready to believe the things which Price told him. So in those days, I had the impression that the governor at least was cooperating with Price and at least blaming Lee for the break in the party. You see. So he got his shock when when he discovered in London that Price was in fact in secret dealings with the Guatemalans.
Who got the shot?
The governor.
The governor, right. So at that time, the governor didn't have any information, at least did not make public any information to suggest that George Price was in cahoots with the Guatemalans in any way.
At least not that governor. A previous governor had just before the general election in 1954, had set up a commission of inquiry to the Sharpen Commission to look into alleged contacts between the People's United Party and Guatemala.
And what did they come up with?
Well, the commissioner said that there were a number of contacts with Guatemala, in which he included George Price, definitely. And he said that Lee Richardson on one occasion had visited Guatemala and had presented and had taken 2 letters which the commissioner knew about.
So he actually, in that commission report, was accusing both George Price and Lee Richardson of making contact.
Except that Lee said at the time that he was merely asked to deliver these letters. That's to the best of my recollection.
But in fact, he was saying that they both had made contact with the Guatemalans.
That's right.
And how did Lee Richardson explain himself, of course? And by the way, I am hoping that one day I'll have the honor of
to interview him.
Also interviewing him and getting this important piece of history. What it appears in much of the material that have been written is that those who broke away from the party went out and began to take a very strong pro-British, very strong pro-colonialist stand. And if this is left in history without clarity, I'm sure that many will be left with the impression that you broke away from something that was clearly nationalistic and Belizean in its concerns, with a desire to go backwards, to fly the Union Jack, and to accentuate all of the traditions of British colonialism. Now, is that the way it was, or how was it?
Well, no, we have to put it within the context of the period. You see, when Price explained to us, when he refused to accompany us to London, that we must never permit Belize to develop in association with the British Commonwealth. See, he gave that as the reason why he was not going to London. Of course, this was said privately, that the thing to do is to get the British out, then develop the country. But that the country must never be allowed to be developed so long as they had any association in Britain. So even though the British had made it clear, the British government made it clear that the question of independence for Belize was a settled matter. It's just a question of moving towards it in stages. Richardson, on the other hand, on his return from London in 1954, announced that we were going to make a development plan providing for $200 million for developing Belize. I think he said over a period of 10 years. So there was this sharp division between Price and Richardson over the question of development. As you can see, Price won out on this in the sense that he sabotaged the effort to make a development plan and to deal with the British.
What about this aspect of it? As I said, the impression one gets is this desire to remain in the fold of the British, as compared to this determination to move towards self-determination.
Yes.
Now, was it merely a strategy on your part